Now, most comic book readers would be aware of the fact that in the 1984 crossover event comic book called Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, Spider-Man acquired a new black costume. And this black costume was part of a race of aliens known as the Symbiotes. And they would overpower their host, along the way sort of bringing out said host's darker personality traits. You would also know that Spider-Man eventually would rid himself of this costume, and that the alien would eventually bond with former Daily Bugle journalist Eddie Brock, creating the entity known as Venom. And then after that, the Venom symbiote actually spawned off a new symbiote that bonded with a serial killer named Cletus Cassidy, creating the entity known as Carnage. Now in 2004, the Carnage symbiote would actually spawn off its own symbiote, which bonded with former New York City police officer Patrick Mulligan, creating the entity known as Toxin. And in 2005, Toxin got his own miniseries with Toxin, The Devil You Know.
Patrick Mulligan's life is in shambles. After being bonded to the Toxin symbiote, he's left not only his job, but his wife and newborn child as well. Though he winds up getting called in to masquerade as an officer in an attempt to track down the villain King Cobra, who escaped a super prison known as the Raft during a recent blackout.
Now, the blackout and subsequent prison riot and escape of several criminals was covered in the first story arc of the New Avengers comic.
Mulligan tries to interview the Cobra's longtime associate, Calvin Zabo, aka the supervillain Mr. Hyde, but Hyde's not really talking. Outside the prison, Mulligan chats with one of his old partners and confesses to being bonded to the Toxin symbiote. Mulligan goes home and tries reading the book The Curious Tale of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Mulligan tries once more to reason with Zabo. This time it works, to an extent, as Zabo tosses one of the Cobra's skin samples to Mulligan. Mulligan then uses that to track down the Cobra and apprehend the supervillain. Afterwards, Mulligan bumps into Spider-Man, who enlists Mulligan's help in tracking down another Raft escapee, a villain known as Razor Fist. Spidey leaves Mulligan with a piece of bloodied cloth in order to track the villain. Mulligan starts to track Razor Fist, but gets distracted by a nearby holdup. He changes into Toxin and breaks up the robbery. However, Toxin's aggressiveness upsets Mulligan as he begins fighting with the symbiote. Focusing in on Razor Fist at his work, we find that he's started as something of a cult for teenage self-harmers. He inducts a new member named Anton, who he then orders to wash several bloody rags. Because of this, when Mulligan begins trying to track down Razor Fist a second time, he winds up finding Anton instead. Mulligan convinces Anton to take him into Razor Fist. Anton takes Mulligan to the Razor Fist's hideout where...
Q Akbar.
Mulligan struggles with Razor Fist due to the Toxin symbiote's reluctance to come out. Anton then jumps in order to save Mulligan, and this prompts the Toxin symbiote to come out and turn Mulligan into a nebbish accountant-type individual.
Yeah, the symbiotes actually possess something of a shape-shifting ability. It sometimes crops up, but most of the time I don't think it's ever really been utilized fully.
Razor Fist begins trying to slice up the still nebbish-looking Mulligan. Finally, after asking politely, the Toxin symbiote comes out. This causes Razor Fist to escape the trap and flee. He winds up hurting a young woman named Lulu. She's the one who led Anton to the cult in the first place, as he runs off. Toxin gives up pursuit of Razor Fist in order to take Lulu to the hospital. Afterwards, Mulligan and Toxin begin having a series of philosophical debates. Meanwhile, a bank gets robbed by another Raft escapee known as the Answer. Also, Razor Fist begins trying to extract information from a dirty cop. Finally, after much debating, Toxin goes out and kills a thug who killed a police officer in a nearby alley. The morning after, Mulligan begins feeling a deep regret as he begins thinking that he's lost control of the symbiote. He then goes out and tracks down the villain known as the Answer. Before taking him back to prison, Mulligan asks the criminal the best way to deal with the symbiote. The Answer's response is simple: throw yourself in front of a train. The suicide attempt fails, however, as the symbiote pulls Mulligan to safety, possibly out of its own self-preservation. Mulligan then gets a visit from his former police officer father, who is constantly imploring him to return to his, Pat's, wife and son. Toxin then goes off to take on Piledriver and Wrecker of the Wrecking Crew, two other raft escapees. After he takes out the two criminals, Toxin receives an ovation from several police officers. As part of an agreement where Mulligan will not attempt to try to commit suicide again, Toxin makes it so that Mulligan can visit his wife and child in the form of a man named Larry. Meanwhile, Razorfist has moved on as well. He's begun forming a cult of murderous children who will then rise up and kill their parents. You know, sort of like the opening of Children of the Corn. The cop on Razorfist's payroll, or at least I think Razorfist is paying him, overhears Mulligan's friend mentioning something about Toxin. Razorfist kidnaps Mulligan's friend and begins torturing him for information on Toxin's whereabouts. This leads him to Mulligan's apartment, which is when Mulligan's father shows up. Mulligan shows up to find Razorfist killing his father. Toxin throws Razorfist through a window, but gives up pursuing the villain, choosing instead to comfort his father in his dying moments. At his father's funeral, Mulligan gets confronted by his estranged wife. It doesn't go very well. However, this does spur Mulligan into bringing down Razorfist once and for all, before the villain can unleash his murderous children in the city. Mulligan enlists Spider-Man's help. Spider-Man promises to take Toxin down if the symbiote begins getting out of hand. Toxin tracks down Razorfist and manages to easily defeat the villain. Before delivering the killing blow, however, Toxin holds back, and Razorfist goes back to prison. Later at the Seinfeld diner, Mulligan sits down with his wife and shows her what he's been hiding and why he left.
One does have to wonder why Mulligan chose to do that in a big public setting. Well, anyway, I'm going to have to give Toxin the Devil You Know a D. It's not really bad, story's okay, the artwork's more than passable, but really I would only recommend this if you were a die-hard fan of the Spider-Man symbiotes, and even then, only if you had read the previous Venom vs. Carnage series where Toxin first appeared. And with that, we've come to the end of another random trade review. Let's see what we'll be doing next time.
Join us on Monday, February 9th for Dark Reign, Hawkeye.